In this video, I will show you how to reinstall all of the wiring back into your Singer 301. Hi, I'm Jen with Sewing Machine Rehab, and I show you how to restore, repair, and maintain your vintage sewing machines. This video is actually part of a larger series. It's called Full Singer 301 Restoration, and I provided a link to the playlist for you down in the description box below. If you took time to like this video, I just want to say thank you, and I encourage you to subscribe to my channel so you'll always know when a new video is out. Now, we can get started on reinstalling all of our wiring. So the parts that you are going to need for this portion of the restoration is I like to call it wiring harness, but one end has the plug for the power cord. The other little end has the plug where our foot control will plug into. And you may not have this on your 301. You may just have this portion right here, depending on what type of plug it takes. It also has the two little leads that connect to the prongs on the bottom of the motor. We're going to put this back. You need to find your little clip that fits up inside the top of the machine. This actually just holds the wires out of the way of the gears. We'll put that back. The two screws that we will eventually use to secure this plug on the outside of the machine. Two smaller screws. We're going to use these screws to attach these wires to the back of this plug. And last, you will need the screw that you took out when you removed the light socket from the front of the machine. So actually, that's going to be our first step. I want to go ahead and secure this back on the front of the machine. That's going to show me how much wire I actually have to work with when I'm feeding all of this back down to the plug itself. So we will first oil the threads of the screw. Just makes it easier to get in and to take out later if you ever needed to. So where we're going to be working first is right here on this little hole. I'm going to take the light socket and I'm just going to push this wire up through the grommet here until I can line up this hole with this hole. And I want to go ahead and get that secured now. This would be really important if for some reason you had to totally take the wiring out of your machine because maybe something was bad here and you removed the wiring nuts and had to strip these wires back. If you install this first because you lost wire here repairing something, this will tell you how much you need and how much you actually have to feed back down to the motor. Then just snug that up. So this is back in place. We'll put the lamp cover on later, but this is all we need to worry about now as far as the light goes. So the next step is we need to feed this back down inside the machine so it can reach down to the actual plug itself. So let me show you how we do that. So now we're looking at the top of the machine. And if you're doing this yourself, you can just stand over it. You don't need to be tilting it the way I am. If you find your gears and then you look back, you should see that there is a square-shaped opening in the back of your machine. Right here, you can see light through it. Your goal is to take these two ends and feed them into that hole. And because they're bent a little funny, you may want to try to straighten them out a little bit, but truly it's just a matter of lining them up with the hole, eyeballing it. Sometimes it helps me to just take a tool like a paintbrush end and just kind of push them past the opening. Once they're past the opening, they just should feed right down inside. Now that's why I had you attach the light here, because I know exactly how much cord I have to stuff down in here. Do you see how my little wire nuts are disappeared? They're not sticking up anywhere. Now I can take this metal clip, and these little prongs here, they face the back of the machine, and it just literally slides on this metal piece right here like this. And then you can use that to push your wires into, and they're never going to move and go anywhere where you don't want them to. So the rest of what we're going to do, we're going to work from the bottom and the side of the machine. Okay, so the wiring is now fed through the top of the machine. It's down in here somewhere, and we're going to fish it out in a moment. But first, I wanted to just say I made a mistake when I was talking about the parts that you needed. I said that these two little screws were for here and here, but look, the screws are already there. These two screws you will need if you have a plug for your foot controller. These two screws will actually hold this plug in place, and that was pretty obvious, so I missed it, but you will need them anyway if you have this type of plug where you have a plug for power and a plug for your foot controller. So we will use them, just not like we thought. So I want to fish these wires that I've fed down in the machine out, and it may help for you to tip your machine up and work from the bottom. But you're just going to pull them out the hole. Before I reattach them to this plug, I want to actually feed this portion, this lower portion of this little harness, if you will, back into the machine. So these are pulled out so I can access them, and these are just fed into the hole. Now it's going to feel a little awkward because you're bending things weird, but it will actually make sense later on. When you attach these wires, it kind of makes sense to want to attach them like this. But we're actually going to attach them so they are more like this. So they'll be the bottom of the harness, these wires that are going to the motor and to the outlet for the plug are going to come straight down. These are going to be attached more coming out the top. And this just has to do with how this wiring is all going to fit inside the machine, especially when we have the motor back in. So you will have to undo one of your screws if you left those on, so you didn't have to remember what all goes where. And start with whatever color you want. I'm choosing the red first, and I'm lining them up like this, if you can see that. Sometimes I find it's easiest to put the screw through one and then the other and then into the hole that I'm going to thread it into. And just tighten it down. If your wires aren't perfectly in position, you can adjust them before you get the screw tightened all the way down. So that's what I'm doing now. And then I'm going to tighten it down all the way. And then the second one will be a little bit more awkward because you're bending it in a different way that it's actually going to finally rest. But I'm going to undo this screw. Don't want to drop it. So first I will feed it through this wire that I fed through the top. And this little eyelet here. And the same way with one coming down and one coming up, that's how I'm going to tighten down the screw. Just go slow and be patient. And I can tighten this down, and then before I get it tightened down all the way, just make sure these are positioned exactly how I want them. And finish tightening them down. So I've connected the eyelets back onto the screws. Now it's going to be a little bit weird when you feed this back in because these are sticking up, but if you sort of twist it a little bit and turn it, you'll get it to go back in to place. Don't push too hard, but you really do need those wires in that position. And you may have to reach up under the machine to make sure that everything is going where it's supposed to go. Right now, these lower wires are caught on a little, there we go, a little metal part. See that? That's what I want. Now I can take the screws that hold this plug into place and reinstall them. And finish it up with my screwdriver. And tighten them both down. And there is a right and wrong way to install this. Just make sure you can read the letters here. It does say 110, 120 volts. That should be right side up, if you're wondering. Now, I still need to go ahead and lock down my plug for my foot control. And I'm just going to find that little part. It's shaped like an 8 sort of, fits perfectly into this groove, like that, if you can see. And these two little screws are what hold it in. And if you didn't have this portion, then you wouldn't be doing this part. Just trying to start them. And it's 1, 2. So I have put my plug for my power and the plug for my foot control back on my machine. Almost. These tiny little screws are the worst. You could maybe tilt your machine up on the nose and do this, and at least you wouldn't have them dropping down and falling. Okay, that's tightened down. So what does it look like underneath? That's what we need to look at next. Here, if we're looking, this is the hole that our motor is going to slide up into, right here. The reason why I had you put those cords or those wires back on the plug that way is all of this is going to get tucked up behind this hole. And in this case, I need to loosen these two screws on the side to feed these wires properly where they need to go. And if you were doing this without working around the camera, you would be able to do this before you firmly tighten these two end screws down. I'm giving myself a little bit of slack here. The plug should wiggle some. And I'm trying to tuck these wires all the way up into this little crevice back here. There. Now they're actually up and out of the way. I want the motor to have all the room that it needs to fit up into this opening, which means that by putting those wires on the plug the way I had them turned, it works so much better for me. I have less wire in the way of the motor itself, if that makes sense. So now that I have this all tucked the way that I want it, I'll tighten these screws back down. And I went overboard and totally took one out just now. But that's it. The wiring is back in the machine. And what that means is if we wanted to, we could easily reinstall the motor at this point. Not going to do that in this video. I'm going to leave this as is, and when we come back, we will go ahead, get that motor reinstalled, as well as put the lampshade back on to the machine up here, and the cover for the motor in the bottom. But we need to grease gears and all those sorts of things before we actually get the motor back in the machine. So I hope this was helpful, not too confusing. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments below. Remember, not all 301s are the same whenever it comes to their wiring. Some plugs had a separate connection for your foot control, and some plugs, both the foot control and the power source, were all ran out of one plug. So you may have a different setup than what we went over today. So if you're confused about that, leave me a comment. I'll try to help you out as much as I can. Otherwise, I will see you again really soon. Bye.